Good morning. I have a palette for us to explore together today. This is the Holbein 24 Well palette, and this is going to be turned into my expansion palette. I've been wanting to consolidate my art supplies down into 3 palettes: a main palette, which I have, a travel palette, which I have, and an expansion palette. And today I'm going to explore and kind of do a first impressions of this palette with you, just go over what it's like, and we'll go over the dimensions and things. I've also got the box for it behind me and we can go over some of that information on it as well. And then in another video I'm going to go over setting it up as my expansion palette, why I'm making it, what an expansion palette is for me, how I'm making it, and everything like that. So that being said, let's look at this palette and why I've picked it up. I know I said I'm going to go over the details of why in the expansion video, but there's a very important feature in this palette that is mind-blowing for me in my practice. So I prefer using slanted wells. So these are slanted wells, and this is typically what slanted wells look like. As I've been painting over the years, I've noticed things that help me in my practice, things that I don't like as much in my practice, and some of the things about painting in watercolor I've found through that experience is I much prefer slanted wells. Slanted wells are my favourite way to store watercolours when it comes to the actual process of painting. I like how I can access the paint with the brush, and any size of brush pretty much. It's very easy to use very large brushes with them, very small brushes, but I also like the ability to kind of thin the paint up here on the actual well too, and it's just a very satisfying painting experience when I use wells like this. In comparison, you can also get pans like this. So this is a full pan, and then you can get half the size, which is a half pan, and full pans are my preference after the slanted wells, but I don't like them anywhere near as much as slanted wells. And then half pans are my least favourite. They're my least favourite. So with the expansion palettes, to give you just a basic rundown of why this palette's useful to me, I want the expansion palette to be the place where I put all of the paints I love using, and I do use, in a dedicated space for the times when I need them. So there are going to be paints that aren't on my main palette either because they don't fit on there, I don't use them quite as much, but I do use them, or they're for special effects that I like to do. And I want to be able to move them around ideally, but if I use a slanted well, it's very difficult to move them around. But for these, you can just pick them up and move them around. And that is why this palette is perfect for what I need. I've lost my train of thought. I have very specific ideas in mind for this expansion palette, and I was originally going to wait to make it until after I'd moved, but when I came across this, it fit all of the criteria I could ever want, because I want it to contain enough paints to be a place for me to put all of the different special effect paints or paints that I don't use that often, but I still use frequently enough that I need a place for them. And being able to move them around while it also being a slanted well is the best of both worlds for me, because I like to keep my watercolors in a specific order. In my painting practice, I like to have yellow, orange, red, pink, purple, blue, green, yellow earths, red and orange earths, and then the darker earths, and then neutrals. And that is how I like to set up my palettes. That's how I've always liked to set up my palettes since I first started setting them up that way. And if you ever run out of a paint and then decide to use a different pigment entirely rather than replacing that paint with the same, you have to clean out the well on these slanted palettes, and it's not a very fun process because some paints will dry harder than others. So the paints that dry really hard, like for example this one here, you can get a palette knife underneath it and kind of lift it off, and it'll usually come off in one piece unless it's really crumbly. For paints that are made with honey, so like Sennelier, M. Graham and stuff, those are going to be way too sticky to do that. It's going to be very messy to remove them. But if you're, but you can move ones like these, you can lift them off and then move them around. But if you have said, say if you've run out of this one and you want to try something else entirely, you're gonna have to clean out the remnants of this colour and then put your new colour in. Otherwise it's going to mix the two together a little bit. And to clean out one of these without getting water next to it means that you have to be quite careful, and then it takes a lot longer to clean because of that. With this I can just pop out a pan once the paint's finished, and then I can clean it out on its own and just pop it back in again. If I get a new pigment and I want to rearrange the order, I can just pop them all out, rearrange them, pop them all in. But at the same time, I still get to keep the slanted wells because if I wanted to have the ability to change them around constantly, which is more likely in an expansion palette than in my main palettes, which won't change that much, it would be better if I used full pans. But I also don't particularly like using a lot of palettes that store these. So it was going to have to be a give and take situation. I was going to have to make a compromise somewhere, and with this I don't have to make a compromise. So let's go over the specifics, the things like the dimensions and stuff of this. So when I was looking at this, I couldn't find dimensions for the 24 well anywhere. I could for the 30 well, which is larger than this, so I knew it would be smaller than the 30 well, but when I have measured it, so I'll do centimeters and inches, it is about 27.5. It's got some overhang either side, so the actual edge is over here. It's about 27.5 centimeters, which is about 10.5 inches. And then it's about 5.25 inches or 13.5 centimeters. And it's also about 1 inch deep or about 3 centimeters deep. So I will show that. About 2.5, 3 centimeters deep, probably say 3 centimeters, and about 1 inch. So there you go. If, like me, you cannot find the dimensions, there you go. I don't think I actually mentioned it in this, but I bought this palette myself. This wasn't sponsored, it wasn't given to me, so I got that out the way. This is quite thick, as you saw, it's 1 inch thick. The mixing areas are 6 millimeters deep, and it says that on the box. So let's have a look at the box. So this is the box. It doesn't have the dimensions on the box from what I've been able to find, but it does say that the wells are 6 millimeters deep, which means that you can get a lot of water. You can make a very large watery wash for doing like a background on here, and you don't have to worry about it getting up into the wells as much, which is good for me because sometimes I do make very large puddles of water and of paint. And it just goes over how you can move these around, and you might notice this too. I'll go over that in a moment. But another nice thing, much like with full pans, you can write the names of the paints underneath the pan in like an oil-based marker, and they clip on with, at 3 points, they clip on with like this circle system and with a notch here and a notch here. And what you do is you kind of slant it down like this. So you slant it down like this, actually, it's like that, and then press down. And these do not move. So I'm gonna shake that and none of them will come loose. The only thing you were hearing was this flapping. So the other thing that I was just talking about though is that it comes with these. So it comes with 2 spare small wells. They call these small even though they're quite large. And then it comes with 4 large ones. You can also buy extras of these as well. I'm not going to use these, at least for the foreseeable future, because if this was going to be my main palette, I might, for example, use this for ultramarine or something, but this is not my main palette. But it's interesting to know that you can get pans this size. They're absolutely humongous. But they clip in over 2 slots. So these have 2 circles, 2 notches, and then they have 1 notch there to clip in because there's actually extra notches here. So this notch would be for the full pan. Or the massive pan. Let's see, is there any other information? So we've gone over the clipping, the 6mm, that you can write on them, that you can wash the palettes. That kind of covers the specifics, I suppose. It is a heavy palette. It's quite hefty. I'd say that it's not super heavy, it's more that it's substantial is probably the best word for it. I can feel that it's got some weight to it to know that it's high quality, it's thick. It's not just gonna be brittle. And yeah, I am excited. I'm excited for this palette. I try to be very, very mindful when I buy new supplies because I want to try to reuse and repurpose as much as I can. My original plan was, my main palette is currently where I'm going to be moving and I've been using this palette in the meantime, which is a really old palette of mine. It's the first big palette I ever bought years and years and years and years and years ago, and the plan was that once I'm reunited with my main palette I would clean out these areas. I'd pop out what I can and then put them in my main palette because a lot of these are in my main palette. I'd put them in my main palette when that needed refilling, and then once I could get this clean I could use this as my expansion palette. But again, I wouldn't have been able to move the paints around as I can with this. So what am I going to do with this palette now? Well, when I move, I'm going to be giving this palette away to, there's either a family member who would be interested in this, or there is a charity shop that get very excited when I come with art supplies on occasion. And I'll be giving it to that charity shop once I am moving, but because I don't know when I'm moving yet, it's my main palette for now. But at least I can start making the expansion palette, so when I am moving I'll be moving with the expansion palette and I'll be moving with my little micro travel palette, and then I will be reunited with my main palette. I ended up getting a little bit rambly in this anyway, but if you have any other questions about this palette, let me know. But we'll be exploring it in a little bit more depth as I actually make the palette and use it. And I'll go over the hows and whys of the expansion palette as an idea in a future video that hopefully shouldn't be too long away, because I've already got my paints out. I've already got them out. So I'm probably going to want to get going with this. And I'm also going to be decanting paint from full pans into this. So I have, for example, here full pans in a tin that I store. Originally I was keeping these either in tubes or in full pans in storage. And you can see that this looks kind of loose. That's because I've already started loosening them with a palette knife and popping them out. And I'm going to be putting, not the actual pan, but I'm going to be taking the paint out and then putting them in these wells. So this is this colour here. So I'll take this out, put it in this palette, and then refill it with some extra paint. And that will be in a future video. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you've been up to in your art practice recently in the comments, and let me know what kind of palettes you like to use, because art supplies can be very subjective in an artist's practice, in what they find the most useful for them. So I'd love to hear about what makes you excited and what makes you happy in your art practice. But thank you again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!